So I had this dream where I was running in a race, and it was this bizarre dream where I was a horse, but I was kind of like a jockey too. I was this being that was trying to perform in a race. And as I was running in this race, there was this kind of Jack Nicholson, Colonel Jessup from A Few Good Men.
Yeah, I remember.
in my head, like telling me what to do, but also jolting me with fear at the same time. And I was losing my performance because I was starting to get afraid of what these jolts meant, and I couldn't really figure the whole thing out. I knew it had something to do with my son getting his dream choice to go into the Marines. But when I woke up, and around that time I had read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And I was thinking about, the brain systems 1 and 2, which he talked about, where system 1 was a fast thinking, quick decision system, and brain 2.0 was the more cerebral side of things, where we would make more educated decisions and guesses. And I thought this really fits kind of with fear too. Like, we have this baseline sensory part of our brain called the amygdala, which is, constantly looking for threats in our environment, mortal threats, physical threats, and also intellectual threats. And then we have this higher level executive function cortex, which is more of our software that helps us think problems through. Yeah. And there's this constant feedback between the two. Is this a threat? Is this a danger? How much of a danger is it? Oh, no, it's not a danger. It's a criticism, and I need to think logically and intellectually about how this person's criticizing my thoughts, instead of it being a saber-toothed tiger coming to chase us.
Right.
So there's always a balance between this brain 1.0 and brain 2.0. I talk about brain 1.0 being sort of your deployment software. If you're in the military, that's constantly looking around, to see what's out there and who's around you, who's behind you. Mm-hmm. And then your cerebral cortex, your brain 2.0, is your executive software.
Yeah.
So when we understand that there's this baseline system that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, it really works really well when you're in a dangerous situation, some nights or some days when you're physically threatened, but it doesn't serve you well in complex situations of modern society. So that was where I sort of came up with the concept of brain 1.0 and brain 2.0.
And the brain 1.0, this may be just for my own understanding of this, but hopefully this will help other people too, is that its responsibility is kind of to detect unknowns, right? I mean, this is the part of our system that's sort of pre-programmed. It's our limbic system. Is that right?
That's right. That's the Colonel Jessup that's always on the wall, deciding what's going to come in and what's not going to come in.
And it's alerting system 2.0 as to what it needs to pay attention to and process, right? That's kind of the processing part of the system, the higher cognitive function, right?
Correct. And it doesn't really have a language. It only has like an anxiety jolt, and that can be super high, or it can be more low and muted, depending on what you're experiencing, what the threat is. So you gotta understand that, recognize it, and kick it up to brain 2.0 to do the problem solving when you feel like you don't know what to do.
Yeah, and I think you use the term black swans, right? This sort of anomaly, which in health professions, I'm always looking at patterns. Over I've done about 25,000 sessions at this point, so I'm really looking for those kinds of things that stick out. But I've also certain things that I've seen before, and then there's testing that goes on to try to figure out what I know from my past and what this anomaly might be, and then having the conversations with those people who I need to consult with.
Exactly. And it's a constant tango between brain 1.0 and brain 2.0, which leads to meaning in our life.
Right. So and then the next part of this that I think is really important. So, just so we can kind of break this down, because I think really what you're trying to do is to present a way of understanding what it is, with these pieces. How do we create these categories, or how do we create these different buckets for what this problem might be. And the other piece of this that you created is this quadrants.
Yes.
And so if you could explain that too, because and then how these two pieces kind of work together.
Sure. And that's the map that I talk about. So you
Right.
can literally map out your fear. And what you do basically is you draw an X and a Y axis, very similar to your high school algebra class.
Yeah.
That gives you 4 quadrants. And imagine the X and the Y axis. So on the X axis, that's that's what we call the objective. Those are material gains. Those are things like getting the job promotion, getting the corner office. And those are the things like attaining financial security. Those are all the tangible things, the material goods. So think of the x-axis.
That which is, right?
Exactly. That which is. Also think on one level that's brain 1.0. In some respects, that's brain 1.0. That's seeing objective things.
Yeah.
And then on the y-axis, that's brain 2.0. That's also the subjective. That's what is meaningful.
Okay.
And if you could also just add another layer, think of the y-axis is your left brain, is your right brain. I'm sorry, the y-axis is your right brain,
okay,
and the x-axis is your left brain. Your left brain is logical, sequential, ordered. It knows you need to do X, Y, and Z to get to where you want to be in your job, and and in your finances and all those other things. And the y-axis, that's your right brain. That's just big picture things. What's the meaning of something?
Yeah.
And so what I suggest is that when an unexpected event comes into your life, you need to pick it apart and to say, what are the objective components of it and what are the subjective components of it?
Yeah.
What is the matter of this and what matters to me about this? So if, let's say, you do get that job promotion and you're excited because you got the corner office and you got a raise, but the person you find out you're working for is a tyrant, and there's no way you could possibly live and work with that person any longer.
Yeah.
So objectively on the x-axis, you're positive, right? So you're off to the right side on the x, but you're a negative on the y. You're a negative on the meaning side of things. It's unhappy for you. So I call that the calm before the storm. That's when something's got to give because you have dipped down. Whenever you're negative on that y-axis, you're living in cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So you're living in a state of where your actions and your beliefs don't meet.
Right.
So that would be a good example of a positive X but a negative Y.
Okay.
As opposed to, let's say, you get fired and you're out of a job, but that causes you to spend some really deep time thinking about what you really want to do in your life, and it forces you to maybe go back and take a course in mineralogy and learn how to make jewelry, and then that becomes your new life calling. That's when something is objectively negative. So you're to the left on the y-axis, but on a meaning standpoint, you're positive. So that's something where you say, oh, that was a bad experience, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And that's what I call a birthing a new skill set quadrant.
Yeah.
So that's the upper left-hand quadrant. And then you've got something where, let's say, objectively it's negative and subjectively it's negative. That's like a loved one gets a cancer diagnosis, or something senseless happens and you just can't make any meaning of it, and it's negative all around. So that's when you're in the lower left-hand quadrant. That's something I call the all is lost quadrant. Yeah. Again, whenever you're in the negative axis on the Y, you're in cognitive dissonance. Things don't make sense to you. Yeah. Your actions don't fit, and the meaning doesn't make sense. Excuse me. And then just to kind of complete the quadrant, so you've got the lower left-hand quadrant, all is lost. What's the upper right-hand quadrant? That's when objectively it's positive and subjectively it's positive. That's when, you're a neuroscientist and a new staining technique comes out, and now you realize your passion for studying the nervous system has now been put steroids on top of because you can see things you could never see before, which is what happened with a famous scientist by the name of Santiago Ramon y Cajal in the early 1900s. And he basically was able to visualize the neurons and the synapse. And he ended up going on to win the Nobel Prize for coming up with the theory about the synapse. So that's a quadrant where everything's positive. Subjectively meaning, objectively positive meaning, and subjectively it's positive as well. So that's what I call flow.
And that flow comes from basically it's the experience and the skill set we've developed, and that other part of our brain is quiet because everything's kind of has come together, right? It's the basketball player who can just hit everything. Everything goes in. Right?
Exactly. And that's when you never want to think. That's when that's the one time when you don't need to employ brain 2.0 to do anything. You just go with it.
Yeah.
But every other quadrant, you need to employ brain 2.0 to help you unpack this. And if you can just know where you are on that quadrant, it's going to help you climb out of it. And so what I say is, so the first step of climbing out of something is just recognizing where you're at. That's the first step.
Yeah.
And then the second step is really drill down on that y-axis. What is the meaning? What is my meaning in life? What is my purpose in life? And when you're stuck, you need to basically ask yourself, all right, I'm in a terrible situation. Let's say you're in all is lost and you've done everything right and something wrong has happened, something terrible has happened. What you need to do at that point is you need to create some type of a micro goal, even if it's the tiniest little thing that moves you or climbs you up the y-axis. So make that action something that's consistent with your character. And what you're going to do is you're going to feel yourself climbing the rungs out of this. Okay, my loved one has a terrible terminal illness. I'm going to spend the rest of their life and my life getting closer to them.
Mm-hmm.
Putting every single effort I possibly can into helping this bring us closer together, whatever that is. And that's going to help you climb up and find meaning and get out of that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And the hard part, is that we come to these things with whatever baggage we have too. I mean, this is one of the pieces you mentioned some of yours, but in my daily practice when I'm working with people, I tend to be treating people a lot who have histories of some kind of trauma. So, what ends up happening is they're kind of in those quadrants, 2 and 3 a lot of the time, right? They're kind of it always feels like there's a calm before the storm, or that all is lost, but I think these kinds of things. So being able to break this down into those objective parts, right? Isn't that the first step?
Exactly. Yes. And then understanding, and this comes with wisdom and time, that the heroic journey is to travel through all of these quadrants. We all travel through them, and it's really a continuous cycle, not always in a clockwise fashion, but generally in this clockwise fashion. We get to this flow, and then something happens and we're not really on our feet. We're a little off balance. We're in that calm before the storm. Maybe things get worse and then we fail, or we screw up, or we step in mud, and then we find a way to birth a new skill set and figure out how to get out of that. And then we move back into flow at a higher level of flow.
Yeah.
And that's what we really want in life. I mean, I say, like, who would want to always live in flow? It would be like very Midas-like, King Midas. It would be like that old Twilight Zone with, I think, Orson Welles, where the guy thinks he's in heaven, but he's actually in hell, right?
Yeah.
Where nothing can go wrong for him. And he goes to the casino and he wins everything and he can't lose. So I think it's understanding that journey. And it took me 16 years to see that with Anthony, that I actually went through all 4 quadrants with Anthony. I went through the flow quadrant when I operated on him, and I walked out of that OR that day when I first operated, and I'm like, this is what I'm here for.
Right,
I love this.
Yeah.
And then when he didn't do well, I was in this calm before the storm. And then when I couldn't leave him, he never left me. I had all these bad coping strategies and suppression of them and forget about it. And I went to the all is lost quadrant and stopped doing pediatric neurosurgery until I started writing a book. And then I started realizing, hey, no, like this is part of what you do. You need to face these kinds of things, this fear and this grief. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I would never, ever trade for a million years the opportunity to take care of Anthony and to go through that experience, because I love it now. And I realize that that's my purpose on earth, that I'm not always going to cure a person, but I'm going to do my very best for them. And I'm going to be there for their parents, for his parents. And, he's still here and he's his number one guy for his mom and dad. And he's part of their family. So I did my job and I'm very proud of it. And I remember on that day, neurosurgery got a lot easier for me. It got a lot easier.
Well, it was interesting. You said something in the book too about how going back to this model of brain 1.0 and 2.0. So brain 1.0 is risk averse, right? Isn't that kind of the way?
Right.
So that it's risk averse, but without the risk, you don't get the reward. That's kind of like to go full circle through these things, to sort of put yourself in the calm before the storm, and have to activate a bunch of tools from your experience is kind of what gives us the highs, the joys, and everything. And so if we don't take that risk, that's what ends up happening too.
That's exactly right. What you're doing is you're constructing a new neural network. So what we're seeing now with all these functional MRI scans and what we're seeing is that, every thought process has a certain series of neuron firing. So if you look at somebody who's thinking about riding a bike, it's the same pattern over and over and over again. And it's burned into our head when we're kids. That's why you can jump on a bike, 20 years after you rode a bike and you can still ride it, because it's a neural network that you've ingrained in your brain. Cognitive dominance is about setting up a new neural network to help you solve problems. And it is a little hard in the beginning. The book can be in certain sections a little bit heady, but that's sort of something you need to break down and kind of lay down a foundation. And the more you practice it, the better you're going to be at it. And it's really, I say cognitive dominance is like training your brain to be ambidextrous, training to leverage your right brain, which is the big picture kind of spiritual, metaphysical concept catcher, with the logical, sequential, thinker, executive function of the left brain. And that's what it is. It's basically toggling between these two to be more effective.
Yeah. And we are probably maybe the only species who does that kind of thing, right? This is a very sort of specific skill set to be able to toggle between. I think it's part of the challenge. And one of the things that somebody asked me about this one time, about why do they say that musicians tend to have higher intelligence? And I think, I was a musician when I was younger, and I think there's something that happens between, you have this very sort of engineering sort of structure to the way music has to be. There's a structure to it, but then you're responsible for ordering it. So then you're using that right brain side to just sort of put all these different things together. But you're also listening to other people at the same time. It's a very complex thing. But to me, that seems also very close to what you must do, in surgery.
It's funny you mention that. My boss, Dr. Jannetta, who I trained under, my mentor.
Yeah, that's right.
One of his criteria at the University of Pittsburgh, which is one of the top programs in the world, he insisted that that the applicants that he chose had to play an instrument, because he believed that they had a skill solving, a set that was unique or improved. He played the banjo, and
right.
He liked athletes and musicians.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. I think that there's an adaptability piece to this, that for me at least, I feel like I've had issues with anxiety my whole life, just on, to some degree. But I think that the more that I sort of push into those discomforts, the more confident I get in trying new things like that. So it kind of works back into these quadrants again, that anxiety fear piece. You can also start to kind of like quiet it down through success, through some experiences that make you feel more comfortable too, I think.
Absolutely. And one of the exercises we do in the book is to kind of drill down on every level of anxiety that you can think of. So we try and build a lexicon of how to articulate where you're actually at, because there's a spectrum, there's a gradient of anxiety to full-blown fear, um, to transcendence, where you have virtually none, or it's very, very low on your list of things that you're thinking about.
Yeah.
So it's good to have that sort of spectrum that you can kind of point to. We have that in the hospital every day. Show me what your pain level is. Is it a 7 or is it a 3? Or can we bump it down to a 3? So I don't think you're ever going to be completely free of it, but you can always kind of figure out a way to knock it down a few levels.
Yeah, I wrote down a quote that I really liked from the book, and it was "Tools to silence your inner underminer." And I thought, that could have easily also been the subtitle of the book, because I felt like that's the one thing that we're really trying to gain by doing this kind of work, by kind of going through this stuff and understanding, what that self-talk looks like. How do we deal with these kinds of challenges when the unknown comes up, and then how do we proceed from there?
Exactly. And that's why, I loved that I was a philosophy major in college. And so I loved like the kind of crossroads of philosophy and neuroscience and, and psychology. It's fascinating to me.
That's funny. I was an English major. And I find very few people who are like you, who kind of like started out in a different undergrad, study, and then went into science is hard, because I think you can put those things together too, just like you're saying.
Well, I'm a huge believer in consilience, which is, there's a wonderful book by Edward O. Wilson, who's probably 94 years old now. He's a Harvard professor. He's the world's leading authority on ants, probably still to this day.
Oh, interesting.
He wrote a wonderful book in, I want to say 1999 or 97, called consilience. And consilience is the belief that there is this common thread between the humanities and sciences. And he points to Albert Einstein and how he took astronomy and physics and mathematics and proved relativity. And Da Vinci. Exactly.
Da Vinci, that same kind of thing.
Exactly. And, that's why I love the XY axis and the quadrants, because that's Rene Descartes. So we're taking science and humanities and marrying them together. And it's a wonderful book about finding that thread, that common thread through everything.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was kind of a sorting experience, just to kind of go through it, to kind of go through my own stuff. Did you have the same experience, writing the book? Is there anything that really came off to you in the end, that in terms of sorting all that stuff, that you really figured out for yourself?
Oh, absolutely. I am so glad that I did this. I'm so glad I had a wonderful co-author, Sean Coyne. He really helped me stitch these stories together, and he brought a perspective that I just would have never had. And so to have that, I was and I finished it, and even now I just feel this sense of like I've got a frame around a body of knowledge that I was trying to wrestle and put together in this one big thing. But now I have it ordered, and I have it in a way that I can pass it on to my kids and to my former wrestlers, which I love to do, is to talk to them about learning, and to the public, which is it's a thrilling experience. I'm so happy and blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah,
it's really a special feeling.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this with me, and I really enjoyed the book. Thanks for sending it. And I hope people become interested in just exploring what they can sort of understand about how they construct their mindset when they're working on a challenge like fear, because I think this is sort of the key to, I think, all of our interrelationships and our passions and the things that we want to push harder into, that sort of inner underminer gets in the way of sometimes if we don't do the work. And I think that's a big part of, when I've done my studies through the Upledger Institute, one of the things that they really get into and they push you very hard on is doing your own personal work, like really making sure that you are getting yourself into the right place, that you have your own kind of practice of what you're doing for yourself to stay in that zone when you're working. And I think a lot of it comes down to doing projects like this.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure talking with you. I love, sharing, stories about it.
That's great. Well, keep doing great things, Mark.
Thank you. And you too.
All right.
All right. Take care.
Dr. Mark McLaughlin, folks. The ability to understand where we are in a moment takes practice, and what Mark has created here is a means of being able to identify what is happening to us so that we can make better decisions quickly and in the face of stressors. One would think that stakes have to be high to feel extremes of stress, but as we discussed here, and as Mark details in his book, the feeling of stress may come from previous experiences that set off triggers in our nervous system, even when stakes aren't high. This is where cognitive dominance is important. To be able to quickly sort and break down the feeling we're experiencing into smaller parts helps us move through these unexpected occurrences without being knocked out of balance by the stressor, improving our ability to make good decisions quickly without becoming frozen by fear. Let me know what you thought of this topic in conversation. You can get in touch with me anytime by email, jeremy@highway2.health. And if you'd like to see us having this conversation, check out our channel, Highway to Health Podcast on YouTube. Thanks for listening and for all that you do. Be good to yourself, be kind to each other, and take care of your planet. See you in 2021, my friends.